All right, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon officially now. It is 12 o'clock. I want to welcome you all to our Importance of Title Insurance and Surveys. Today is Thursday, February 9th, 2023. So if you are watching this in the future, some of this information may have changed based on rules, regulations, governmental entities. So please check with Sarah and or Linda to make sure the information you have is accurate. Without further, I'd like to introduce you to Linda Painter from Virginia Home Title and Settlement and Sarah Steadfast from Newtown Mortgage. They'll be leading the session today. If you do have any questions, please raise your virtual hand or unmute yourself and ask or type it in the chat. I guess type it in the chat or raise your virtual hand would be better. And then we'll call on you. But please do ask questions as we go along. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Linda and Sarah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good
I
morning.
hope everyone's having a great day because it's supposed to be really nice outside. Okay, I think I would like to start first with talking about surveys. And Sarah, you input anything that you want to put in on this. I know that when we have the closings, and we highly recommend, and there is a part on the sales contract where you can also put whether the buyer wants a survey or if they're waiving it. I highly suggest that they do get those surveys just so you know what the boundaries of the property are and if you have any encroachments or not. So there's a lot of them that are showing up now that have those encroachments, and the people have added decks or sheds or anything like that. And it also helps us when we know about flood zones, when the lender comes up and says the property is located in a flood zone. And when they draw that survey, they also draw the flood zones out there so we know whether any improvements are touching that property, and that determines the cost of the flood premiums. Now, usually, when the surveyor goes out to do that survey, they will call us and let us know that it is in a flood zone, and do we need to get a flood certification, which we will then ask you and the lender if that's going to be required, because the lender will require a flood certification if that property is notated to be in a flood zone. Now,
okay, I'm going to give you a timeout there just for a moment.
Go ahead.
I want to make sure. I sat in a closing one time where the settlement agent said to me, every zone is in a flood zone. It's a question of whether you are in a special flood hazard area. So if you're in a special flood hazard area, that is when you are required to have the flood insurance. And when you do a loan through Newtown Mortgage, we actually pull the flood certification up front, so we know whether it is in a special flood hazard area. And as Linda says, that's kind of one of the important things that you do need to know, is whether it is or not in a special flood hazard area. And the other thing to keep in mind is if you have a listing or you have a buyer who is looking at a property and you want to know whether it's in a special flood hazard area, we are more than willing to pull that flood certification for you. So, sorry, just wanted to add that in there.
That's okay. And also, a lot of times people ask, the agents will ask the sellers, number one, is it in a flood zone? And number two, do they have a copy of their survey? And that survey can or cannot be used for our closings. And number one, it's going to be the age. They cannot be more than 10 years old. And we need to make sure that they've done no improvements to that property since they bought it. And then we can get a copy of that survey and use it for the buyer. But the buyer and the seller have to sign an affidavit saying that no improvements have shown up on there. Now, we were talking about flood insurance, and if the seller is in a flood zone, they have flood insurance. They probably have that flood certification that we could use for the new buyers so they don't have to purchase one. And the flood usually is, the certification by a surveyor is about $550, the same as what the average survey is charging right now. And it takes a couple of weeks to get those. And we want to make sure that when we order those surveys, that the sellers know that, that we're going to be doing that, so that when the surveyor shows up out there on that property, they don't end up trying to call the police or something, or that they have their dogs in the house so that they can do the survey. Now, if we're going to do one that's not a regular lot and subdivision, those surveys are going to then become costly, and they can go into the thousands to get that survey. And if we don't have a lot and block in a subdivision, and there meets and bounds, and the lender is requiring an Alta 9 on that buyer's a lender's title policy, then we have to get a survey also then, because we cannot issue it without a survey. And so once we know, and you know you're selling property out in the middle of Suffolk or in the boundaries of Gloucester or anywhere like that, and it's not a lot and block, be prepared to get a survey so that the lender can be get their Alta 9, because all lenders require that.
Talk about what an talk about what an Alta 9 is briefly.
An Alta 9 is what protects the lender if there's any encroachments or any thing or any problems with the E's and R's on that property. So a lender will not give a loan unless they have that Alta 9, and we can't give it unless we have a survey to make sure we know the boundaries of the property. And usually the legal description has meets and bounds. And when you pull those tax records, a lot of times it will say meets and bounds. So that would give you a heads up when you're pulling out for your tax records. Okay, so I think
Linda.
Yes.
I just saw one that had the old cherry tree and the river and the fireplace, the old fireplace, as the description.
Wow.
It was out in Martinsville.
Yeah, they're out there in those, and it's a lot now out in the counties that we're selling a lot of property out in the counties, and so most of the time, and you know, those surveys are going to be way over $1,000. So did they have to get a survey on that then, Tim?
They did. They chose not to get a survey, but it was literally two paragraphs long, the description.
Yes.
I think I'll get a copy and get it sent to you so you can look at it. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll look at that. Yeah, to see where we are on it, because yeah, and that seems to be a lot of what we're getting like now, where they're shortening down those legals, especially when they're going, you know, it's at a pipe stub and a tree stub and a ditch, and who even knows if all that stuff is even still there once they've started doing some stuff to the properties. And if you're dealing with property that's on the water, we need to know if that property goes out into the water or if it stops before they get to the waterways, because then you're dealing with riparian rights. So anytime you have property around like that, I highly always recommend that the buyer gets a survey. And always know it's going to take a couple of weeks for us to get those ordered. So does anyone else have any questions about surveys? Okay, now we're going to move on to owner's title insurance. And if you're going to be taking a listing, one of the things I highly suggest for you to do is that you ask the seller for a copy, number one, of their survey, number two, of their owner's title policy, and a copy of their closing statement. Make sure they do not pack those and that they have them available if we come up upon a title problem. And more in this industry, we're having lots of unreleased deeds of trust, judgments showing up, anything like that. And the seller's title policy will help us try to get those things resolved. And if we can't find those lenders, a lot of lenders have gone out of business. They're either bankrupt, they've closed, or they've been merged. That owner's policy is going to help us a lot. And a lot of sellers right now, I think we alone have 3 transactions in the works where we have to go to a company called Require so they can help us obtain those certificates of satisfaction so that we can get title cleared. So more and more we're having to do that. And we go back 40 to 60 years on all of our title. So we want to make sure that when we pass title over to that buyer, that title is clean. Now, at our closings, we have by state law a form, it's called availability form, that has to be signed by all buyers where they are getting owner's title insurance or they're declining title insurance. I highly, highly, highly recommend that they never decline owner's title insurance because that is their protection for title. And I know there's a flyer that Haley has up there that talks about owner's title insurance, and we are going to get those printed and put into packages so that you can have them, or you can call me and I'll email it to you. There's two types of owner's title out there. There's the standard and they're in the enhanced. The enhanced covers a whole lot more than the owner's standard policy does. And it also has an inflation factor in there that as the property is, as they own the property, that value of that property goes up. And almost everyone who does closings always puts the enhanced on there. And it's very important that that buyer gets it. And it's even more important that you as agents do not tell them not to get it. Because if you do, you put yourself and your liability on there if a title problem should ever cross up. Now, when we issue ours, we issue it either through Fidelity or through Stewart. And
Linda, do you have that list of the difference between the
owners and the standard? Yes. Haley
Yeah.
has it so that she can put that up as a PowerPoint for us. And it
Okay.
does give you the differences of what are on the two properties. And that's what's there. And that's what's going to show up in all the buyer's packages here shortly. But the standard tells you what it does cover.
I think, go ahead and just run through that really quickly because I do think it's important.
Yeah, because once you get down into the enhanced, you'll see where enhanced covers any problem that we might have. But then it stops when it gets down there for a violation of any of your restrictions or any encroachments, a dwelling that's not zoned properly. And forgery. What happens if there's a forgery in the chain of title? Like we had one not long ago where a seller came back and said, I want my property. And he had never signed the deed over. Someone else had forged that. And two chains in the title, somebody had did a power of attorney where they sold somebody's property. So there's many things out there for forgery, but an enhanced property will cover that and the standard does not. So we always usually do the standard. Now on the meets and bounds without a survey, we cannot do the enhanced. We can only do the standard on that because we don't know what the property descriptions are. We're only going by the meets and bounds. Another thing that comes up about owner's title insurance, and that's when we're at a closing and we cannot put a girlfriend on title or a parent on title because the lender doesn't allow it. You can't, especially in which Sarah could talk about that on an FHA loan, we cannot put a girlfriend or someone else add to that title. It has to be only the insured. Well, all the time somebody says, well, you can just add them after closing. Well, if you do that, you have negated your owner's title policy. So don't ever do that. That is really a no-no. If you're going to add somebody, we've got within 30 days a limit of when we could add somebody and run them back up. But you always want to make sure you clear that with the lender to do that. And a lot happens a whole lot where you've added them to the contract and then they cannot be added for the loan and they get that taken off. So Sarah, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's really important that you understand that in the olden days, you could do those things at closings, but you can't do that anymore. As the lender, we run what we call fraud guard, and we have to run everybody who's involved in the transaction. The real estate agent, the buyer, the seller, the settlement agent. I mean, anybody who is involved in that transaction is run through Fraud Guard. So if you all of a sudden are going to add somebody, we have to then, that loan basically has to go back into underwriting so that it can be run through our fraud detector. And this is not a Newtown Mortgage specific thing. This is what all lenders are doing to make sure that that this is actually the right person, and that there aren't any outstanding judgments or anything against people that could attach to the property prior to us being able to record the mortgage lien. So it's very, very important. I think that Linda and I usually talk about powers of attorney too, but powers of attorney also are another thing that we can't just pick up at the last minute. We really need to know that somebody is going to be closing the loan via a power of attorney. So how's that?
Yeah, and we can talk about power of attorney because it also affects the title. We want to make sure that whoever is signing power of attorney for the new buyer, that we have to run them also to make sure that they are good, and we do the same fraud check and make sure that everything is good on that. And you must remember, under our rules, I can't act by power of attorney for any of our clients, nor can you. You've got to have somebody that's at arm's length from the transaction being able to sign by power of attorney. So that's really important when we get ready and all of a sudden the buyer isn't showing up to closing, or our sellers. So we have to make sure we have that power of attorney and that it's good. And I know that a lot of times it's going to be a general or durable power of attorney. We have to have specific to the property to be able to use that for our transactions. Now, on the seller side, I know a lot of times they do have durable, but we have to have that also insured. And in some lenders, they also want to see a copy of that power of attorney. But all that has to do with the title and making sure that we're passing title correctly. Now, if you have a buyer who's bought the property and now they've decided to put that property in a trust, sometimes they forget to do that when they're getting the mortgage, and the lender would have to see all those trust documents. So after closing, they will put it into a trust. That's okay. It does not negate the owner's policy. It's still good when we follow it underneath the title, because the trustee is usually also the person who was the owner of the property. Now, if they're going to put it into an LLC, that negates the owner's title insurance. So they have to know when they do that, that their title insurance is no good. And I usually try to tell people a lot when they're doing that, because you have all these people now are doing flippers and the LLC documents, but it gets rid, they cannot have their owner's policy anymore. And I know that we're going to be coming up on assumptions here, maybe in the marketplace, and a buyer at that transaction has to buy their own owner's policy. So that can be bought at the closing under those assumptions. The lender title policy does not have to be bought at that time because the lender is already insured, but a new buyer would have to get their own policy. Now, when we have a buyer and they have a loan, they have a lender and an owner's policy, and that's called a simultaneous issue. So the owner's policy is not as expensive as if when you're getting ready to do this assumption, the cost of it is going to be higher because we're not issuing two policies at that time. So a simultaneous issue is only done with a lender and an owner. Does anybody have any questions about title insurance? Sarah, do you have anything else to add, or Tim?
I don't think so. Are there any questions? Nobody's had any questions? Anybody had any situations that have popped up that you'd like to share with us? I know that the whole survey issue and the title insurance, the owner's title insurance, we look at when you're looking to try and save the borrower money, it doesn't save the borrower money. It does not save the buyer money. The amount of issues they will have down the road if they do not have owner's title insurance and they do not have a survey is not good. Nancy, you have a question?
Yeah, so Linda, you said if the property then becomes part of an LLC, then it will negate the policy, correct?
That is correct. The policy that they had at that time, it negates it because it changes the title. It changes
what-
the ownership. So they could
So-
get a new policy, and usually they could get a simultaneous issue, not a simul, they could get a reissue rate because they already had it. But because that LLC is a whole new entity to title.
So but they can get a new title policy.
Yes, they can get one for the
Right.
LLC, and I highly recommend that they do that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Maureen, you had a question?
What if the property is inherited?
If the property is inherited, that depends now. Did they have an owner's policy? And hopefully at that point, remember, they're still on title and that policy is still in effect. So we would use that owner's policy to take care of anything, yes, because they were the owner, but it just passed on now to their heirs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, but you know, Maureen, if when the heirs get ready to sell that property, if any judgments crop up against those heirs, then they have to be paid at closing.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, they don't cover backwards. They only it goes to backwards, but not the current, because when you now have that estate, we have to run all the heirs so that we can clean title up.
Okay.
Anything else?
Anybody else questions?
And as Linda and I say, no matter where your loan is closing, no matter who you're using for your lender, please consider Linda and myself a resource. If you have any questions, you
Right.
just, there are no stupid questions when it comes to title insurance and surveys and property ownership. So please don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us or both of us. We are more than happy to help you.
Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? It's
Yes.
Lewis.
Yes, Louis.
Hey, Louis.
Hey, how are you doing,
How are you?
Linda? Linda, good. Will you explain the hazardous risk premium?
Okay, yes, that also falls along so that we can pass and the buyer can get owner's title insurance. A hazardous risk premium starts in when we have an estate. And it has been with the people have died within 1 year of getting ready to sell the property. So let's say we have people right now where we're doing a closing and the seller passed away in December. We would have to do a hazardous risk policy binder on that, and it's $2 per thousand of the sales price. And the seller has to pay that, and they will sign a hazardous risk bond with the title company, and they're ensuring that there are no judgments or anything like that. Because in the state of Virginia, any judgments or anything like that can be filed against the state for 1 year for that property. So all title companies to be able to issue title insurance for the buyer and the lender, the seller must do that hazardous risk bond, and all title companies require that.
Thank
And
you.
it's a protection for the title company if they have to go out and defend those judgments or anything that got filed against the estate.
Do you
Does
want
that
to talk
help?
about a mechanic? You want to talk about a mechanic's lien?
Oh,
Just
mechanics
briefly.
liens.
It's not that
Just
bad.
briefly.
Briefly.
Okay, mechanics liens, they can be filed by any contractor that walks on the job. That mostly they are really involved when you have new construction. But we have in this era now in the state of Virginia where we can have an MLA, and this is for new construction. An MLA is posted at the time of the building permit.
What's an
And
MLA?
A mechanics lien agent. So let's just say we are now the mechanics lien agent of a new construction that you all have sold. We will then get a copy of that building permit to make sure that we are listed on there properly. And then any contractor that walks on that job has to notify us by certified mail that they will intend to file a mechanics lien if they do not get paid during the construction. If you don't do that, then you fall behind and your mechanics lien doesn't count. It goes in behind. Now, if you have sold a piece of property and you've had a lot of work done on that property and you've done that work and the contractor hasn't been paid yet, they can file a mechanics lien against the property and the seller has to pay that, and it ties up title until that has been paid. And anytime a buyer gets a new construction or you have a flipper out there, you want to make sure they get owner's title insurance so that they're protected against mechanics liens that can get filed against that property. Because anytime work has been done and we don't know about it and it hasn't been collected at closing to pay that bill, a mechanics lien can be filed.
And I remember being on a call with Jay Mitchell at one point where he talked about when you are getting a listing, that it's a good idea to look at the city and see what they've got in the way of building permits. Because as Linda says, if somebody works on the house, they've got quite a while. I mean, you're talking about if somebody redid the bathroom or even if they put on a new roof, those things that require building inspection, building permits. Which I don't know that that's necessarily something. You've probably watched HGTV and they go and they find out that they've got some room that was attached to the back of the house and they look for the building permit and the city says, well, guess what? You got to take that down because there was no building permit. So that's the kind of thing that it's just going that one extra step and asking that extra question, because a mechanics lien can be problematic for having a smooth closing.
Well, also, when you're dealing with a flipper or anybody that's done a whole lot of work on their house to improve it so that they can sell it, when we get ready to underwrite title, we always go online. We always look at the house. We always look at the value, and we always ask the question, what did they do? Did they get a building permit? And I need a list of everything they've done on that property to make sure that everything has been taken care of and that we have bills and it was done legitimately. Because a lot of people, don't want to get building permits, and we want to know what kind of work was done, and was it cosmetic or was it serious where a building permit needed to be done. And when they start knocking down walls and all that kind of thing, then you have a problem. Okay? And there's a lot of flipper loans out there, a lot of flipper deals that we have to check on all the time. So if you have a listing and we're asking for all that, your seller has to provide that. Okay?
Any other burning questions? Tim, what do you have to input? You sitting there, I'm watching you coming on and off mute like you're trying to ask a question.
No, I'm just trying to make sure I stay facilitating and wrap it up when y'all are done.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
Any questions? Sky's the limit.
Marine's got another one.
Yes,
Okay,
Marie.
great.
If you have a client who wants to buy at auction, what should you suggest they do to protect themselves?
I would have a title search done ahead of time to make sure when they buy that house, they're buying whatever is on that title. There's outstanding deeds of trust, if there's judgments, if there's outstanding real estate taxes, I would suggest they do a title search first. Because it's not always disclosed at an auction. It's just like when they go to a private foreclosure, it's the same thing. Because you're buying whatever is on that title. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for attending. And
Thank
don't
you,
forget to
Linda.
call us if you have any questions.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.